through longing, our story takes a magical turn. And we're able to leap into other worlds. Our first stop is a garden called Love.
The magician's nephew. Diggory and Polly are tricked by Diggory's strange Uncle Andrew into participating in a magical experiment. They quickly find themselves in a mystical wood and soon discover they can access other worlds by jumping into the puddles there. In one world, they witness Aslan singing Narnia into existence, and Diggory learns the meaning of genuine love.
We're now at the Kilns. This was C.S. Lewis, his house, from October 1930 until he died. It was purchased by Warney, Lewis and Mrs. Moore. It's called the Kilns because over in that direction over there were actually two what they call bottle kilns. Clay bricks were actually made on this site.
Life took on a new vitality after my conversion. I had discovered a new way to live and was not afraid to say so. This, of course, changed my reputation around Oxford. I became either famous or infamous, depending on with whom you spoke.
I was lucky. We were given the chance of going to have our tutorials with C.S. Lewis. And he couldn't have been more charming. Very, very polite, very nice manners. Like a rather tubby teddy bear. He was kind of lovable in a way.
People used to say you could tell when C.S. Lewis was lecturing because the bicycles outside the lecture hall were stacked 4 deep.
One of the things about going to a lecture by Lewis in Oxford was you had to turn up early or you wouldn't get in.
He had the biggest halls available because they were absolutely packed. Not with just English students at all. Medical students, everybody went. They were, you know, it was a real crush because they were brilliant.
I also began writing more books during this period, and not just books in my field either, much to the disapproval of some of my peers. I wrote on any subject in any genre that captured my attention.
One of the things that people forget about Jack is he didn't write with a typewriter. He wrote with an old-fashioned dip pen. You dipped your pen into your bottle of ink, and then you wrote maybe 5 or 6 words. Then you had to stop because the pen ran out of ink. So every phrase that Jack wrote was skillfully crafted in groups of 5 or 6 words.
I know of no other author who has published successfully in so many genres that are still all in print. He has published in the realm of English literary history, English literary criticism, novels, essays, poetry, thousands of letters, apologetic work, science fiction, theological satire. I mean, it's just a remarkable phenomenon.
If you ask why someone like C.S. Lewis covers so many different fields, it's not difficult at all because you can move around from one area to another very easily if you're in love. So he loved all the aspects of life.
Seeing as I had experienced a love beyond comparison in the other world, nothing captured my attention more than the nature of love in this world.
Lewis rehabilitated friendship as one of the loves.
Friendship is the greatest of worldly goods. Certainly to me, it is the chief happiness of life. To the ancients, it was the most fully human of all the loves.
He has brought it back so that we can actually talk about people who love one another without always having to talk about romantic love.
For Lewis, friendship is as much about caring for the same truth as it is believing the same truth. So he could be friends with people who didn't believe at all what he believed, as long as they cared about the question.
He was the best listener I ever came across.
Friendships are born at the moment when you at last meet another human being who has some inkling of that something which you were born desiring. For my friends, it was our mutual love of stories that brought us together. We even started a kind of club to read and discuss our works in progress. Little did we know that our meetings would go on for 30 years, and that our reputation would become legendary. We called our band of friends the Inklings.
Here we are at the Eagle and Child's in Oxford. but it's better known to the sort of local people as the Bird and Baby. And it was in this pub that C.S. Lewis and the other Inklings, J.R.R. Tolkien, Charles Williams and others, used to meet and have a pint of beer and probably a sandwich. Many of the manuscripts were first read in there, like The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe and The Lord of the Rings.
People always imagine these as being doleful, serious affairs. Well, it was nothing like that. One of the hallmarks of the Inklings meetings was the roars of laughter that came from them all the time. And yet, at the same time, they were cutting each other's work to ribbons and having great fun doing it.
One thing that the Inklings had, which we don't have, is they were committed to dialogue and discussion. And I think now everyone is just like, hey, whatever you believe, that's fine. Your thing is your thing, mine is mine.
So if you imagine an Inklings meeting, it would get heated at times. But the reason why it was heated is because they cared so much about their common object, which was to understand better, to understand themselves and the world and God.
The difference is it's not, they wouldn't take it personally.
Their opinions of each other's work never interfered with their friendship. And that's something we've lost today.
One thing that Lewis' conversion did for him is that it opened his sympathies up to people who were totally unlike him. When you think about how many thousands of letters he wrote, he may have written 50,000 letters, then you think, what an outpouring of charity.
Friendship, like all earthly loves, can only be fully enjoyed when it submits itself to the highest form of love, a love I call charity. Charity is God's love. It is all giving, not getting.
Someone once said, if I wanted to destroy a nation, I would give it too much. I would have it on its knees, pleading, miserable and sick. Give them more than they really need, and then watch them consume more than they really need. So I think that Lewis lived a simple life and used a lot of his money for good causes.
He had 2/3 of his income given away by a lawyer, but Lewis kept himself anonymous. 2/3 of his income was given away.
Beyond giving money to those things we find lovable, there's an even deeper power in charity. True charity enables us to love those things we find naturally not lovable. We are all receiving this kind of charity every day. There's something in each of us that cannot be naturally loved. We can be forgiven and pitied and loved in spite of it with charity, no other way.
I saw him stop and give some money to a beggar. And I said, aren't you afraid he'll use it on drink? And he said, well, if I kept it, I would. And he said his rule is, when in doubt, give.
Divine charity, as we are speaking of, is not an emotion. It is an act of the will. Only this love himself working in the human heart, can truly transform the pain and poverty, the barbarism and ignorance of our world.
He was laying down the guidelines for the future, things like we need one another, that tolerance is something that must be followed.
He is on record as saying just exactly what he thought about the strife between Protestant and Catholic in Ireland. He was very much against that and saw it as something which is inexplicable in terms of the Christian faith. The key to the Christian life for Lewis was to love your enemies, to do good to those who hate you.
Of all the arguments against loving one's enemies, none makes so strong an appeal to me as, careful, this might lead to suffering. But to love is to be vulnerable. Love anything, and your heart will certainly be wrung and possibly broken. The greatest revelation of Aslan's love in Narnia is not how generous he is with the creatures in his care. It is that he's willing to suffer for them.
The most autobiographical of all the Narnian Chronicles is The Magician's Nephew, and it's the hardest one for him to write.
In the story, Diggory's mother is sick, dying of cancer, we presume, as Lewis's mother did. And there is expressed in that story, this fervent desire and wish of Diggory that his mother should get better. And that is such an emotional passage in the story that I'm sure that his own feelings are very involved there.
And that desperation causes him to begin to cry. And that's when you have this unbelievable scene.
Please, please, can't you give me something that will cure Mother?
Up till then, he had been looking at the lion's great feet and the huge claws on them. Now, in his despair, he looked up at its face. What he saw surprised him as much as anything in his whole life. Great shining tears stood in the lion's eyes. They were such big, bright tears compared with Diggory's own, that for a moment he felt as if the lion must really be sorrier about his mother than he was himself.
My son, I know. Grief is great. Only you and I in this land know that yet. Let us be good to one another.
He realizes, Aslan loves my mother more even than I do. And I think for C.S. Lewis, there came a point at which he thought, God loves my mother more than I do.